Hey guys, it's me. And also, little baby Milo. He's not a little baby, he's actually an old man. Anyway, anybody who knows me knows that as much as I am like a literary fiction girly, I also love a good nonfiction book to kind of break things up every now and then. Nonfiction can be really hard to get into if it's not something you're used to reading. I had a really hard time getting into it at first, but I thought I would give you guys a list of books that are like nonfiction but kind of have a little bit of a narrative or kind of read like essays. These are books that I think that even if you don't like nonfiction and you're looking to dip your toes in the water of nonfiction, you could be interested in. I've tried to make it a pretty expansive list. I have some memoirs, I have some sciencey stuff, I have some social sciencey stuff, I have some history stuff. There's a little bit of everything. So without further ado, these are the 10 nonfiction books that you need to read to convince yourself that you are also a nonfiction reader. The first one looks a little scary. It looks like something your teacher made you read in school, but I promise you, it reads like a novel. It's so interesting and it's super educational. My first recommendation is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. So in science, there are these things called HeLa cells, and they're cells that are used, from my understanding, to like run tests of like medications and different things on. And they all originate from this one specific woman of color. Her cancer cells were able to essentially endlessly multiply and have been replicated and used in scientific labs all across the world. This book takes a look at her life and the story behind this woman who does not get enough credit for all of the contributions that her body has had to greater science. Her family has not received any money from all of the money that has been made off testing using HeLa cells. I think it's a really interesting look at kind of how underprivileged communities are taken advantage of by the medical community. It definitely reads more like narrative, even though it's about HeLa cells, which is kind of scientific. I'm not a scientific person at all, and it doesn't read sciencey and dense. It reads like a narrative story. I really enjoyed this book, especially if you're looking for something more on the learn something side of nonfiction. This one is definitely super good. Okay, the next one is one that I feel like you've probably heard of, but not actually thought about reading. I feel like everybody's heard of Beautiful Boy by David Scheff. It is honestly one of my favorite books I've ever read. This is a memoir from the perspective of a father whose son is dealing with addiction. It talks about his early life, him as a kid, and it kind of follows the dad as he questions all of the parenting decisions that he's made. He is trying to balance the right amount of help without enabling, and it takes a really deep dive into addiction, and not just addiction's impact on the person, but addiction's impact on families. It is such a touching story. The dad was actually a writer, I believe, but I want to say he was like a journalist prior to his son falling into addiction, and his son falling into addiction led him to write this book. I recommend this book to any and everyone. Next, we have another memoir, staying on theme, In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. This is one of my books that if I could give it 6 stars, I would give it 6 stars. You can see she has lots of tabs in her. I love this book. This is the story of a relationship as it sort of devolves into abuse. It's a really interesting look inside the minds of a victim who maybe doesn't feel like a victim and doesn't notice that she's being victimized. You watch this relationship sort of devolve, and you watch how hard it is for her to break away from the relationship and how hard it is for her to sort of figure out what comes next for her. She tells the whole story of the relationship through this analogy of like the dream house, and all the chapters are titled The Dream House as. If you are looking for a really good memoir, I would recommend either of these 2 books. Next book I want to recommend you is The Art Thief by Michael Finkel. This tells the story of a couple who is one of the most successful pairs of art thefts in just history. They methodically go in and steal smaller pieces to build their own personal collection, and the way they do it is really interesting. They went a long time without ever getting caught or like falling under any suspicion. They were some of the most successful criminals because they were so unrefined in terms of how they behaved as criminals, and they have this really unique justification for why they steal. They feel like they are better, more rightful owners for the pieces of art they steal than the museums they're stealing them from. The amount of stuff they stole totaled up to almost $2 billion worth of things, and they just had it in like this tiny room in his mom's attic. Michael Fink goes back and catalogs some of their greatest thefts from before the thefts were ever even linked to one another. It's so interesting. This reads like a mystery thriller novel. It doesn't even read like nonfiction. I've said this about all the books, but I loved this book. I know everybody recommends The Body Keeps Score. I read and enjoyed that book and thoroughly recommend that book to people who are looking for like a deep psychological, scientific-y almost kind of breakdown of how the body takes count of trauma. If you're looking for something a little more narrative, a little more based on one person's story, I recommend What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. This is a memoir of a woman who has experienced some pretty serious trauma in her life, and it kind of talks through her breaking down some of that trauma, going back into therapy. It talks through some of the strategies that really helped her break it down, and she definitely talks about the connection between your body and trauma in a very similar way to The Body Keeps Score. It's just told through a narrative, cohesive story, not through a bunch of facts and statistics that I think can be a little bit hard to digest if you're not somebody who typically reads nonfiction. I think this book is a great alternative. It's Cultish by Amanda Montell. This book talks about kind of the language of cults, the psychology of cults, why they work, why people fall into them, and also how cult mentality has sort of permeated modern society and how it's deeply ingrained in so many things that we do and say and the way that people function. It is super interesting. I love reading a book where you can tell like, oh, this person's just really into this thing, so they wrote about it. If you're interested in psychology type books, but you don't want something that's super facts and statistics and all that, this is an interesting one. My sister, who does not read at all, read this book and really enjoyed it. So even for non-readers, it's enjoyable. So if you're a reader who's just looking to get into nonfiction, this might be a good place to start. Then we have Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. I know this looks like a book that your grandpa's gonna read. I promise you it's not. This book talks about the Osage tribe, which the short version is that the American government moved them to this little place because they thought there was nothing there and it was an inconsequential piece of land, but it turns out they were sitting on oil-rich territory. So the Osage tribe became very, very wealthy with all of this oil riches, and all of a sudden all of these Osage people start turning up dead. This book talks about the journey to figure out why all of these Osage people are turning up murdered and if it's related to their new influx of wealth. This book also talks about the birth of the FBI, because the case of the Osage people is one of the first things that the FBI sort of did in its current iteration. It's super interesting. This is another one that reads like a mystery thriller novel, but you're also learning so much about Native people. You're learning so much about their culture and the prejudices that they've faced. You're learning a lot about that specific time period and the way those people were treated. I think it's a really important story, not to mention it's just interesting. Next one, we're gonna get a little social science-y again. Unlikable Female Characters by Anna Bogutskaya. I don't know if I said her last name right. This book talks about the burden of likability on women characters throughout history, but it also talks about the burden of likability on women just in society. It talks about kind of the shift from women as side characters to full human beings with thoughts and feelings and emotions in media. It talks about some of the consequences, both positive and negative, of that change. I found this book really, really, really interesting. It's a really great reflection on just society. It made me think about things that I had not even thought about, or things that I understood there was probably a deeper meaning to, but maybe didn't understand what the deeper meaning was. This provides some really good kind of theories as to why those things might be the way they are. It's a super easy read. It looks a little long, but it's actually very digestible and quick. Okay, my last two are gonna be John Green books, because you know I have to always go back to my man John Green. I'm actually in the middle of rereading every single John Green book for a video coming soon. Hype about that. Okay, the first of the two John Green books that I think you should read is Everything is Tuberculosis. This is quick. It is a short little book. It's like less than 200 pages. This is a look at tuberculosis through history and the way that tuberculosis has impacted greater culture, because it has been so prevalent historically through every single race, socioeconomic class. And it also talks about the fact that we now have the cure for tuberculosis, but it is completely inaccessible to people in lower income countries. It is very, very interesting, very, very quick. This is another case of like, this guy just knows a lot about tuberculosis and he wants you to know it too, which I feel like is really exciting. It's really interesting to hear someone talk about something that they are just so clearly very passionate passionate about. Then we have the Anthropocene Review by John Grann. This is actually a collection of essays, so I think it's a really great one if you're just starting to get into nonfiction, because it's broken down into little essays. So if one of them you're not like vibing with, you can just like skip around. It talks about different things we have and why they are the way they are. It covers so many different topics. And again, John Grann is just like a quirky, fun guy who knows a lot of stuff. And I want to just sit down in a room with John Grann and have him tell me all the stuff he knows. I think that I would learn so much better that way. I love everything John Grann writes. This is your reading list from me to you. If you check out any of these books, let me know in the comments down below, or if you've already read some of these books and you like them, let me know. If you want more book recommendations, reading vlogs, all the things, subscribe down below. And if you want to keep up to date with what I'm reading, when I'm reading it, and what I'm liking, you can check out my Instagram right here and linked in the description box down below. I will see you guys later. Bye.